This toast truck started out in the 1917 era to 1933 at the Yellowstone National Park. It's a white model 1045A, and so you'd get off this steam locomotive and you'd jump in this open top park bus and you'd go see Old Faithful, you'd see Mammoth Hot Springs, you'd see grizzly bears. And they sold it off during World War II. They didn't really need a lot of buses, so somebody shortened it up. They put a 28-29 Ford cab on it, and because the chassis was so heavy, they made it one of the first heavy-duty enclosed wreckers in the United States. They used it through 1976 with original drivetrain. I have the cab car. And the build quality on this is absolutely amazing if we walk by it. You know, this is the original radiator here. It's a brass radiator, cast out of brass. The original frame, original suspension. So that's a VE pump out of a bread truck. And we literally found the rustiest, crustiest one we could find. We changed the oil filter, fired it right up, been using it ever since. If you look in the cab, this is the original Henry Ford Black. Still has the original windshield, and it has the best preserved steering wheel anywhere you'll find out of a white Yellowstone Park bus. It's got the advance and retard for the timing, and it's also got a place to set the fuel in it. Now, the name of this rig, as we go back here, is Mator. Not Mator, it's Mator, which is Mator's dad. So, you know, Mator's about a 1956, and this is at least a 1925. This is an exhaust whistle. This is one of the first safety features on our Yellowstone Park buses. They need a way to warn you as they come up at 15 to 30 miles an hour to get out of the way. So this is actually an exhaust whistle. It's not off a train. It was designed as original to this. This is the narrowest set of axle techs in the world. There's been no paint work done. That's all of the weld and the grinding. We had custom axles that were machined up, but that gave us the track to fit Mator. This truck was built, you know, approximately 100 years ago. And if you look at the welds, we've got arc welds, not a single crack in there. We've got acetylene welds, not a single crack. You have a double miter cut, you can't get your finger through. So the build quality is amazing. That's at least a 30,000 pound chain drive winch, and it's off a chain drive still. We're still using the original chain drive, the snatch blocks, everything else they made this in. It's almost like it came off a boat because it's got those pulleys on the side that you'd run the rope around a couple of times and pull in different lines. So I don't know what it's off, but I am sure it was probably some boat. And that's one of the original spare tire that's up there. So that's what the original tires would have looked like before we converted it and put the military axles and tires on. We're using all the original factory springs. Look at this one. This one it's a 14-leaf spring. This spring's over 100 years old, and we just run 777, and it's still in one piece. It's amazing the quality that they actually built and they have. We've done Desert Roads and Trail Society event out here, the Utah 4x4 Winter 4x4 Jamboree. We've done recovery for Rich Klein of Trail Hero for the Trail Breaker event. Then it's been to SEMA. In 2018, it was top 5 of SEMA. It is, as far as I know, one of the first heavy-duty enclosed wreckers in the United States, and I'd say it's the oldest continuing operating wrecker in the United States. I'm Steve Maxfield. I'm the owner of MX2, or MX2 as we're going to call it. And I'm here with Lars Woolsey today to introduce you to one of our newest builds. This is a very unique one and a very special build, and it's a one-of-one. It has a Model A cab, and it actually has a wrecker component. This appears to be the original paint from the Model A cabs. After World War II, this bus was sold off, and it was shortened 18 inches. And they added the Model A cab to have fully enclosed weatherproof cab. We were just having a great discussion about that, whether this was actually weatherproof, but compared to the buses that were open top, it was, and they added this wrecker. This truck here is probably the best example of an all-original white drivetrain and wood wheels that are available throughout the world today. They actually run the exhaust through this with a double butterfly valve and run a horn through it. Now we're going to go ahead and show you the motor on this. There's also a VIN tag. That VIN tag shows all the patents on the truck. This motor is in such pristine condition, that motor would fire up when we put gas to it. When I first saw this truck, I just absolutely fell in love with it. The problem is the owner was also in love with the truck. The owner happens to be my uncle, and he restores the park buses. Now these motors they don't make anymore. And so this motor to him was worth a lot of money. So he was going to tear this whole thing apart, throw everything else in the dumpster and take the drivetrain. And I couldn't stand to see that because of workmanship. I was finally able to purchase the truck this year, but it's without the drivetrain. So we don't get the motor, we don't get the transmission, we're still fighting over the radiator, but basically he's taking the drivetrain. Back in the day, this probably would have been the nicest tow truck on the road.
Might have been the only tow truck on the road.
Might have been the only tow truck on the road. As we've thought about it, we've thought about several things we got here on the board that we decided that we'll make this truck, put it back on the road, but be true to what it was. And what we've thought about first is a Cummins 4BT retrofit. If you see right here, we have a 4BT, and it was retrofitted into out of a, like a bread truck where it had a gas motor. Now, most people these days are using a P pump, twin turbo, blowing a lot of black soot. I'm not really into that because if you're blowing black smoke, it's unburnt fuel. So a little VE pump is going to be everything that we need on this, and it's just a great motor. We've decided to use a manual gearbox because it's very similar to what we've got. This is a T19, and it's a 4-speed. But we want to make Mator a little bit more because back in the day, if you could have had a tow truck, it was one thing, right? And a Model T car, and you put chains on, and they went everywhere. Sure. We've seen where they've gone. But what if you could have a 4-wheel drive? Yeah. So that would be even cooler. So the next thing we decided would be really great for Mator is AxleTech 4000 series axles. Now they don't make them narrow enough, so we're actually having a company narrow them. We wanted to keep the original look and fit under there. The next thing is we thought, what about tires? They're almost a 40-inch tire. If you look right here, we're about a 46-inch tire, 45.5-inch tire. So these tires are only about 4.5 inches bigger. The other thing we're going to use is the AxleTech series transfer case that comes into here. It's an all-wheel drive. It's a 60-40 split. They're made for what they call MRAP, or mine-resistant armored personnel carriers. So they are almost bulletproof. And then for drive lines, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. You were asking about these, Lars. I got you some MRAP driveline. Yeah. Now what's really nice about this project is we went ahead and run the calculators. There's a lot of math involved, and you have torque. And this little thing might only have 250, 300 foot-pounds of torque tops. However, but you multiply that by the gear ratio, the low in the transmission, multiplied by the gear ratio here, multiplied by the gear ratio in the AxleTech. And this thing will have a very low crawl ratio, but this will have all the torque you need. And the idea of this truck, as we go through, is to make it so we can actually do vehicle recovery at Moab and other jeeping events. We have one that jumped a dune down at the winter 4x4 Jamboree, and he took the whole front axle out. And they didn't have a tow truck to go in and get him out. So what they had to do was put the front of the truck on a Honda hood and then skid it out to sand dunes. They made it out, but it was a real pain. The other things that we're really concerned about is safety. So we chose to do hydro brakes and steering on this. It's not full hydro. We'll talk about the steering. The brakes, we're having the axles modified to accept Dodge 2005 dual calipers and pistons. And we're going to run hydraulic brakes, and they're going to be driven off the motor with a hydraulic pump. But one thing is if you're off-road and your motor dies, what happens to your hydraulic brakes?
They go away.
They go away. So we're actually going to use what they put on the 2-ton, 5-ton trucks these days, and it has an electric assist, where if your motor dies, it has an electric pump, you still have brakes. The next thing we're going to do is put a trans brake on here, so we have a park brake, because there's no park brake on the AxleTech. And we will do line locks as well. We're going to have about 3 or 4 different braking systems, plus wheel chocks. Other thing that we want to do is we want to keep it as DOT compliant as possible, and keep everything original. The springs, the sway bars, the shocks, whatever you want to look under here, they did things better than we did today. Now if you come over, we're going to talk about the steering real quick. Now a full hydro steering unit, why being easier, is not DOT compliant. Because that'd be like driving your tractor down the highway. You lose a pressure pump, you lose steering. This is a beautiful gear-driven box, and it also has those controls that we seem to run through the steering wheel. And I just can't stand to lose this, Lars. But with those big tires, we can't steer it. So we've thought about a way to retain this and make it steer. And Ford made a unit that on the arm you had a manual box, but on the steering arm, the tie rod link, drag link, I guess you'd call it, drag link, they had a ball valve. And whatever that ball valve, the direction it was pushing, would put out hydraulic pressure to a ram to try to help it steer. So we're going to use that same ball joint down here on the drag link, and we put the AxleTech, we'll put a hydraulic assist on there, so that ball valve will direct the pressure to help us turn those big tires. We'll still have the original gear-driven unit, but it'll be a lot easier to turn. This is the Mator build, and we decided to call it the Mator build with an O, because M-A-T-O-R, because it's not Disney,
Right.
and this is Mator's dad. So I'm here with John Booth of
MC Welding.
MC Welding, and also Lars, and we just got a special delivery. Can you tell us what you did to these axles?
I took 10 inches out of each one, the front and the rear. I took 7 inches out of one side on the front and 3 inches out of the other side. And then on the rear, I took 5 and 5 and beveled and welded everything. I have my own tooling to center everything. So I welded them back together, and I even took to the high school and
Turned the rotors down.
machined the rotors down to 15-inch diameter.
So I gave John some very specific dimensions of what I wanted, and I said, John, I really hope you can do this. And if I come over here and show you some of these pieces, not only did he do this, but he brought the parts back. I mean, look at that massive piece of tube. Well, Lars, you ready to rip and tear?
I'm ready.